Alright, so we're going to talk about pH buffers here. So there's not going to be any math in this section. It's going to be kind of hand wavy general trends. Alright? And so to make it clear what we're talking about, I got to first define a buffer and then we'll talk about how they work. And so if we look at pHs throughout different parts of the body, so I've talked about what pH is, so now it's totally fair game to just throw this out. Different areas have different numbers. So, for example, stomach acid is going to be 1.5 to 3.5. And that doesn't seem like a big range maybe, but remember this is an exponential scale. And so this is anywhere from this to about 100 times as strong. Alright? So this is like, well, I either have $100 in my bank account or I have $10,000 in my bank account. That's the difference. And so now you're starting to see, like, that's a big deal. Like, that's a big difference. And so it fluctuates. So, you know, it can be very acidic. It can be very acidic. It can be also very acidic, but it can be in a range of very acidic. And this is actually going to tie into a buffer system. We're going to talk about that too. Sweat. You think it's just water, but our skins are actually coated in acidic residues from amino acids and stuff. And so it's 4.5 to 7. So it starts out neutral and our bodies tend to acidify it. So the pH can shift on, you know, water on the surface of our body. And so that's another pretty big shift. Urine. This is a pretty funny one actually. So I'm also going to be incredibly mature when I talk about this, obviously. But 6.5 to 7, but that's in the AM. And then it's 7.5 to 8 in the PM. And I can't remember why off the top of my head, but essentially you wake up in the morning and your pee is more acidic than when you go to bed at night. I think there's a little more nitrogen in it at night or something like that. Yeah, so you know, it's how we dispose of our nitrogen waste. So that's why it's basic. I just cannot for the life of me remember why it acidifies. We go to bed and it acidifies. So if you're a nocturnal person, these would actually flip. Just so you know, like this is tied into your sleep pattern. But what I always chuckle about is just the poor souls that had to sample all the urine to make this. It's not a huge difference, but to measure the statistical difference between the two. And be like, oh yeah, no, definitely. You pee acid in the morning and you pee base at night. Yeah, we've solved it. We've done it, team. You know, anyone else find that no one ever gets near them when they ride the bus? like, you know, I don't smell anything. Do you smell anything? All right, and then the last one I'm going to show here. So there's a lot of different pHs throughout the body. That's one point I want to make too, is it can be far to function. Like our stomach acid is in our stomach. That's an organ that is there to digest stuff, and it basically lyse molecules apart with acid and just get things to break down to the point where they can go through our intestines and have all the vitamins and nutrients absorbed out of them. Whereas we're dissolving nitrogen waste here, so it tends to be more basic as we are releasing more nitrogen. You know, sweat is to cool us, but it does react with the surface of our skin, and it's basically just water that we're releasing, and so it reacts with the surface of our skin. It is, you know, salt water, but it reacts to the surface of the skin, and it can have a big change in pH. So it can be, pH can be swung very easily. Now, our bloodstream, on the other hand, is going to be 7.35 to 7.45. That's a very narrow range compared to everything else, right? That's the big takeaway here. I was kind of just setting up this moment. That's the narrow range. And we're going to talk about how this happens. But what we do is there are ways to make it so that systems kind of have like an inertia. So like sweat doesn't really have, you just push it and pH moves. But blood, you push it and it just sits there. It doesn't, it can absorb acids and bases and it barely flinches. And it does that by using a buffering system, a pH buffer system. So it has a buffer. It's like, you know, if your internet's slow, you can watch a video buffer and then you burn through the buffer and you have to watch it buffer again. So what that is that's wiggle room, right? So that your video doesn't stop if your data, because your data rate's going to fluctuate a little bit, it's packets are being sent, sometimes they drop, sometimes whatever's going on, and so you don't want to be watching the video exactly as it arrives. So this video that you're watching right now, there's your progress bar, and out in front of it, it is chasing a buffer bar. And so you're just moving along, and the buffer bar, it might shrink, it might grow, it might just stay out there the whole time. Most internet now, if you live in a metropolitan area anyway, not out in the countryside, is pretty reliable and fast for streaming video. But it's not like hand to mouth. Like there is a buffer. There's some time to burn if there's an issue with your internet, and then it can catch up and shoot ahead again. It doesn't stop. And that's what we're doing with the bloodstream, is there's some room to deal with acids and bases without the pH changing. That's what a buffer does. Okay, so let's get a little more specific on buffers, and then we will revisit the bloodstream. So, to be clear, let's get this in writing. Buffer solutions resist changes in pH. Now they do have like a range where they can't resist anymore. Just like your buffer can run out on your video, it can run out in solution as well. And so it will resist changes in pH, and we're going to say when small, but small is relative to the system, quantities of acids or bases are added. I keep mixing my words together. Alright, so at a certain point, there's what we call buffering capacity. And so different systems have different buffering capacities. We're not going to worry about that too much, but a buffer doesn't work infinitely. You can push it, and if it wasn't buffered, it would move. But you push it, and it moves just a little bit. Instead of moving all the way over here, your pH just moves a little bit. Like sweat, boom, it moves. Your bloodstream, it just shifts a little bit. And you can keep pushing it, and then eventually, it'll just move. But there's a range. You can push it both directions, and it barely changes. And then you get it out of that range, boom, and it launches, just like sweat did, because it can only buffer in a certain area. All right. So, what do you need for a buffer system? You need a reversible process, which means you need a weak acid or a weak base. And depending on what the acid or base is, they're going to buffer at a specific pH better than others. And the other thing is, buffers work best when your solution is 50% weak acid, or if it's a solution built with a weak base, 50% weak base and 50% conjugate base. So you have a weak acid, it's half weak acid, half conjugate base. Or it's half weak base and then half conjugate acid. So these are paired. So, this goes with this goes with this. Because you can build it out of a weak acid or a weak base, and then you just have the opposite, that's a conjugate. And you don't want it to be like all the acid and none of the conjugate. So maybe you want to be somewhere around 50-50. So half your molecules are the weak acid, half your molecules are in the conjugate base form. And that's going to let you buffer the most effectively. And so what happens is eventually, if you start right in the middle, you're pushing, the concentrations are shifting very strongly. So it's a Chatelier's principle thing. So we'll see in a chemical equation here in a minute. In fact, on the very next page. So buffers are going to resist pH changes, and they're going to do it by being made out of weak acid, weak base solutions. So let's look back at the bloodstream now. and look at the buffer system used there. So the carbonic acid buffer system, or sometimes they call it the bicarbonate buffer system, is what maintains the pH of our bloodstream. This is what keeps it... Man, I keep doing that. Is it Friday yet? Alright. You don't know. You don't know what day it is I'm recording this. Could be a Wednesday or something. Who knows? It's a half Wednesday, half Thursday. Alright. How do you get a half Wednesday, half Thursday? I don't know. I guess you work a 4-day week or something. Maintains pH of bloodstream. Okay. So, remember we had that tight window. It only moved 0.1 typically. So it's really tightly controlled. This is how that happens. Buffer system, alright? So what does this look like? Well, it's actually a double equilibrium process. So first we can generate carbonic acid. Alright, so this is our carbonic acid. So CO2 in our bloodstream will combine with water and it will make carbonic acid. This is a key detail we're going to talk about a little bit. Because what it does is it actually ties the pH of our bloodstream to respiration. And if you take AMP with Brian, he's going to go on and on about this. I mean, I can't even like make toast in the break room without him going on and on about this. I can only imagine what it's like in his class. He loves the bicarbonate carbonic acid buffer system. All right, and so what we get is a second equilibrium process, and so we get an acid. So this is our weak acid. This is carbonic acid. And so what does it look like, by the way? Well, it is and so you can look and like, oh, like I have a carboxyl group and it is bonded to another. So it's kind of like a weird. You've got you can look at it like two different carboxyl groups. Anyway, that's what it does. And so what happens is one of these H's pops off, and you get a minus sign there. All right. And so this is bicarbonate. You might remember it from your list of polyatomic ions. Bicarbonate. Alright, and then we get H+. Or, you know, it combines with water to be H3O+, but I don't want to mix another water in. And so what happens over here is these combine to form carbonic acid. But carbonic acid can also break down and put more CO2 in the bloodstream. And so you have dissolved CO2 in your bloodstream, and it will undergo equilibrium with water, make carbonic acid, which then undergoes equilibrium with the bloodstream, and gives us this situation. And so if we just look at the right side of this, this is what's buffering the pH of the bloodstream. And what's driving it is a waste product from our cellular metabolism. So it's pretty tight little package here that our body has built to maintain pH. Like we took a waste product. Like we just normally just think, oh, we just generate CO2 and we exhale it. Well, we can actually put it to work for us along the way and use it so that our bloodstream doesn't become too acidic or too basic. And I will talk about what happens probably on the next page. You know, just a description of what happens when pH gets too high or too low. So, we have both of these present in the bloodstream, and so what happens is Le Chatelier's principle. So if we add acid, and I'll write this in a second, but if we add acid, we overload the right-hand side, and it's going to generate more carbonic acid. Well, guess what happens? When we generate more carbonic acid, we're going to use up a lot of that extra H+ we put in. So bicarbonate's going to go down, carbonic acid's going to go up, but pH is going to stay, or H+ is going to stay relatively level, which means pH is going to be relatively unchanged. And so that's how we tightly control it. So, you know, what I'm saying is if we have something acidic in our bloodstream. Well, we're going to increase the concentration of H+, but Le Chatelier's principle says that this is going to mean that we're going to shift left, which is going to knock out most of that extra H+. It's going to bring H+ back down. Not all the way, and so that's why you can keep pushing, and eventually you'll run out. Now, if something basic enters the bloodstream, so what we do is, if something acidic enters, we're going to push the system left. If something basic enters, we're going to pull the system right, and it's going to replace that H+. So if something basic enters bloodstream, which apparently that's a term that's taken on some pop culture meaning, but for me it's just always the opposite of acidic. I don't know. I'm getting old, I guess. People are like, "Oh, that person's basic," and I'm like, "Well, did they roll in some sodium hydroxide or something? I don't understand." Anyway, blood, man. I'm just, I'm so sad that I'm nearing the end. There's only a few more videos to make that I can't spell anything right. I'm overcome with grief. So if something basic enters bloodstream, that means that our H+ concentration is going to go down, because it's going to react with H+. So remember, bases are going to remove H+. And so this side's going to go down. Our equilibrium is going to shift right. And it's going to, when it shifts right, these are going to break apart. We're going to get more bicarbonate, but we're also going to get more H+. And so we're going to replace most of those H+ that got eaten up by the base. So it's going to bring H+ back up. So equilibrium is used to control pH in our bloodstream. And it's very important that we do. Keeps in that range of 7.35, 7.45, which is very important. But it is also tied into our into our CO2 production and how much is in our bloodstream. And this is also used to generate stomach acid. So this is linked, our breathing through this process links to stomach acid production. So if you take a bunch of antacids, your body's going to need to feel the need. You might not feel like it needs to replace that acid because you took all, heartburn or whatever. But your body's going to go like, oh, the pH in the stomach's too low, we need more acid. Where do those acidic protons come from to make HCl? They're going to come from our bloodstream. Our H+ are going to be pulled out of our bloodstream and used to make stomach acid. Well, that's going to bring down this guy. This is going to shift right. That's going to use more CO2. And so what you're going to do is you're actually going to get slowed breathing. And Brian will talk more about it if you take his class. But you can tell if somebody's having pH problems with their bloodstream based on their breathing pattern. Among other symptoms. Like, he knows more about it than me. I'm just a chemist. But I know a lot. I make a lot of toast when he seems to be in the room. So I know a lot about it. It's his favorite chemistry item, so he always brings it up with me. And I assume every other chemist in the building. And I want to be clear, I like Brian, I do. So if you want to take his class, I encourage you. If the online environment's working for you, that's typically what he's teaching in now, sure, go for it. And you will definitely see this. And you'll probably see it from other instructors as well, but I know you'll definitely see it from him. And you'll see it linked to breathing patterns and things like that he's far more qualified to talk about than me. Alright, so in conclusion here, why do we need to maintain our pH in our bloodstream? What are the issues? Well, if the bloodstream gets too acidic, we can get some symptoms ranging from headache / confusion, So, you know, day at the DMV. And it goes all the way up to coma, which is probably in some ways better than a day at the DMV. My apologies if any of you work there, but also you understand what I'm saying more than anyone else. Alright, so that's one problem. If it gets too acidic, what it does is the acidity can pass through the blood-brain barrier and can affect your brain function. So you can get, you know, confused or a headache, which maybe some of you right now go like, oh my god, my bloodstream is too acidic. My head is killing me and I'm really confused. And that's probably more just that, you know, this is a pretty high level topic we're talking about. So you probably haven't acidified your bloodstream because you have a bicarbonate buffer system or carbonic acid buffer system to control it. Now, if we go the other way, so if it gets too basic, then we have a whole other set of issues. We have a whole new range of symptoms. And so they're going to range from muscle cramps, well actually just muscle weakness, and then it'll progress through cramps or pain, up to tetany seizure. And if you don't know what a tetany seizure is, it is an involuntary contraction of muscles. So a tetany seizure is generally your entire body locks up. So your default position for muscles is actually on. And so you have to spend energy to turn muscles off. That's what happens. So your default position, so if you get a tetany seizure, everything locks up because you're not telling things to relax. That's what's happening. And the reason that happens is that relaxation signaling process involves metal ions in our bloodstream. And if the pH drops, goes up too much, becomes too basic, then those metal ions start forming solids with hydroxide ions in solution. And so our bloodstream starts getting, you know, things like calcium hydroxide clogging it up, or magnesium hydroxide. And then those magnesium and calcium ions aren't there to tell our muscles to relax, and so we're just locked. We're locked. And, you know, you are using energy when a muscle is locked, let me be clear, but you have to signal it to stop firing, and that's what the metal ions do. So I always like to play the game of which is least bad when presented with these options. Hopefully you enjoy playing along with me. For me personally, I will take coma any day. I mean, I already have confusion most of the time I'm walking around anyway, and so if it goes all the way up to coma, well, I'll take that over tetany seizure. You're wide awake for this thing. Man, this is a peaceful sleep, and this is just like your entire body. You are involuntarily planking is what you're doing. And you are high impact, high strain planking. Like, this is not like, oh, I just have to hold my body flat. It's like your body is bored and nothing will stop it. I'll take the nap anytime. Maybe you disagree. Maybe some of you have been in a coma and you swear you never go back. You'd rather go out with your eyes open. That's cool. I respect that. But I'll take this one. And like I said, who doesn't have a headache and confusion these days anyway? Muscle weakness and pain. Oh man, like that's why 95% of us avoid exercise. Who wants that? So yeah, I'll go this way. Hopefully, again, thanks to carbonic acid, I don't have to choose. I just don't have to deal with either. But you can get some significant side effects, not side effects, or I should say symptoms or signals, or signs and symptoms. That's what it is. I'm a medical person, I swear, not really. Either way, and there's oftentimes breathing patterns as well associated with this. And Brian can tell you all about that. All right, so that's going to be it for the pH section. So we did a lot here. So first off, know how to identify whether something is an acid or base, and then if it's a weak acid or weak base, be able to complete those reactions with water. Except for strong bases, you don't draw water, you just show it dissociate. And And then be able to do the pH calculations. Understand the pH scale roughly, like if it's high, it's basic, if it's low, it's acidic, and it can go to 0 or negative. Be aware of that. Be able to convert between pH and concentration, or concentration and pH. Use those formulas. Know how to use your calculator for that. That's my best piece of advice, or at least be able to estimate. And then understand what a buffer system does. Understand the features that it needs. So it needs to be a weak acid or weak base paired with its conjugate. And it works best when they're 50-50. As you shift away from 50 and 50-50, as it becomes like 90-10 or something like that, it's going to be a less effective buffer system. Pushes are going to start making it go farther. You nudge it, not much happens. Nudge it, not much happens. You nudge it, a little bit happens. Nudge it, a little bit more happens. And then eventually you're out of the buffer range. You've, what we say, overrun your buffer. You are out of buffer capacity. And what that means is it's not anywhere close to 50-50 anymore. And so it's going to fail the buffer. And then, keep a rough idea on what it helps prevent. Like, why is it so important that the bloodstream is buffered? Well, here you go. It's not the only buffer system in the body, like our intracellular fluid needs to be buffered as well. But I'm just going to focus on the bloodstream. So, that's it for this section. So we did a lot. 3 longish videos. But this one didn't hit 45 minutes like I threatened, or the last one, whichever one it was. But, So, as always, any questions, let me know. I've given you the whole story you need to know for the class. So if it's not clicking, sometimes it just helps to hear it a different way, and I'm happy to help with that.